You work as hard as anyone, but success seems to elude you while others advance rapidly around you. You're starting to wonder if there's a secret formula that successful people know, because the gap between where you are and where you want to be feels insurmountable. I am Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who found strength in philosophy during the darkest times and maintained unshakable inner peace while ruling the most powerful empire in history. The Stoic habits I'll share will transform your entire approach to achievement, giving you the mental resilience that turns pressure into power and obstacles into opportunities. The same philosophy that sustained me through plagues, wars, and the burden of empire can sustain you through any challenge on your path to unstoppable success. But first, like this video, subscribe for more Stoic wisdom, and comment below where you're watching from. I want to know which corner of the world is ready for transformation. Let me tell you about the moment my life changed forever, and how it taught me the first lesson about true success that most people never learn. I was 18 when Emperor Antoninus Pius adopted me, not because I was exceptional, but because my adoptive grandfather Hadrian had decreed it. One day, I was Marcus Annius Verus, a young man studying philosophy and rhetoric, dreaming of a quiet life devoted to wisdom. The next day, I wore the purple stripe of imperial succession, knowing that someday I would rule the most powerful empire the world had ever known. The purple cloak they placed on my shoulders felt heavier than lead, not because of its fabric, but because of what it represented: the lives of 60 million souls who would depend on my decisions. Every choice I made would ripple across continents, determining whether families ate or starved, whether soldiers lived or died, whether provinces prospered or crumbled. Most people fantasize about power, imagining how wonderful it would be to have unlimited authority. They see the marble palaces, the golden cups, the armies that march at your command. What they don't see is the crushing weight of responsibility that comes with it. Every morning I awoke knowing that my weakness could lead to disaster, that my poor judgment could cause suffering on an unimaginable scale. This is where most people's understanding of success goes completely wrong. They chase the external rewards, the title, the wealth, the recognition without preparing themselves for what comes with it. They want the crown but not the responsibility. They desire the authority but not the burden. I learned something in those early years that transformed my entire approach to achievement. External success without inner strength is not just hollow, it's dangerous. The higher you rise, the heavier the weight becomes. The more people depend on you, the more your character matters. The greater your influence, the more your flaws can hurt others. I watched other members of the imperial family crumble under pressure because they had pursued power without developing the philosophical foundation to handle it. They had ambition without wisdom, desire without discipline. When the real tests came, the plagues, the wars, the impossible decisions, they broke. But I had something different. From childhood, I had been drawn to Stoic philosophy, to the teachings of Epictetus and the other masters. What had once seemed like abstract academic exercises suddenly became practical survival tools. The Stoics taught that true power comes from mastering yourself, not others. They showed me that real success is measured not by what you achieve, but by who you become in the process of achieving it. This is the secret that separates those who build lasting success from those who flame out spectacular when the pressure increases. The habits I'm going to share with you aren't just philosophical concepts. They're the practical tools that allowed me to carry the weight of an empire without being crushed by it. They're the same tools that can help you handle whatever weight you're carrying in your own life, whether it's leading a team, building a business, or simply trying to create something meaningful in a world that seems designed to tear you down. The first thing I realized was that success isn't about getting more, it's about becoming more. It's about developing the inner strength to handle whatever external success brings. Because here's what I learned in those purple robes. If you can't handle the weight of what you have now, you're not ready for what you're chasing next. The first habit that transformed my ability to handle impossible pressure came to me in the darkest hour before dawn. When the weight of empire felt too heavy for any mortal man to bear, I would wake each morning before the servants stirred, before the petitioners gathered outside the palace gates, before the urgent dispatches from distant provinces demanded my attention. In that sacred silence, I developed what became my most powerful tool for unstoppable success: the discipline of morning reflection. Most people begin their day reacting. Their eyes open and immediately they're checking messages, responding to demands, letting the outside world dictate their inner state. They surrender their power before they even get out of bed. I learned to do the opposite. Each dawn, I would sit with my personal journal, the collection of thoughts that would later be called my meditations. I would prepare my mind for battle, not the physical battles I would face on Germanic frontiers, but the psychological battles that determine whether a day brings you closer to your goals or pulls you further away. I would write to remind myself of fundamental truths. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they can't tell good from evil. But I have seen the beauty of good and the ugliness of evil, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own. This wasn't pessimism, was preparation. By anticipating the challenges I would face, I could respond from a place of strength rather than react from a place of surprise. By setting my intentions clearly, I could maintain my course regardless of what storms arose during the day. The power of morning reflection lies in its ability to transform you from a victim of circumstances into the author of your responses. When you begin each day by connecting with your deepest values and clearest thinking, you create an unshakable foundation that external events cannot disturb. I would ask myself each morning, what kind of person do I want to be today? How will I respond when people disappoint me? How will I handle setbacks and unexpected challenges? What am I ultimately trying to accomplish? And how do my today's actions serve that larger purpose? This practice gave me what most people lack: the ability to stay centered when everything around me was chaos. During the plague years, when death stalked every Roman household, I could maintain clear judgment because I had prepared my mind each dawn. During the Germanic wars, when barbarian tribes threatened our northern borders, I could make decisive strategic decisions because I had already connected with my core principles. Modern successful people understand this principle intuitively. They don't leave their mental state to chance. They create morning rituals that prime their minds for excellence. They understand that how you start your day determines how you live your life. Your morning reflection doesn't need to be elaborate. Even 15 minutes of intentional thought can transform your entire approach to achievement. Ask yourself, what challenges might I face today? And how do I want to respond? What are my priorities? And how will I protect them from distractions? What kind of person am I becoming through my daily choices? The key is consistency. I never missed my morning practice, even when armies were marching and crises demanded immediate attention, because I understood that external success without internal preparation is just a house built on sand, impressive to look at, but destined to collapse when the storms come. This is your first habit for unstoppable success. Own your mornings, and you'll own your life. The second habit that created my unstoppable success was forged in the frozen forests of Germania, where I learned that reality is not what happens to you, it's how you choose to see what happens to you. For years, barbarian tribes had been pressing against our northern borders, threatening the peace that Rome had maintained for generations. When I became emperor, I inherited this crisis. Most would have seen it as a catastrophic burden, an impossible problem that would define my reign as a failure. But I had been training my mind in what the Stoics call the discipline of perception, the practice of separating facts from the stories we tell ourselves about those facts. Every situation that appears on the surface contains multiple possible interpretations. Your success or failure depends entirely on which interpretation you choose. The Germanic wars were a fact, but what did this fact mean? I could have seen it as evidence that I was an unlucky emperor, cursed with problems my predecessors had avoided. I could have viewed it as proof that the empire was declining, that our best days were behind us. I could have interpreted it as an impossible burden that would crush my dreams of being a philosopher king. Instead, I chose to see it differently. These wars were an opportunity to test and strengthen the principles I had learned from my teachers. They were a chance to prove that Stoic philosophy wasn't just abstract theory, but practical wisdom that could guide real decisions with real consequences. They were the universe's way of asking me, do you really believe what you claim to believe? This shift in perception changed everything. Instead of approaching the northern campaigns with dread and resentment, I approached them with curiosity and determination. Instead of seeing each setback as evidence of my failure, I saw them as information that could improve my strategy. Instead of viewing the enemy as an evil to be destroyed, I saw them as a force of nature to be understood and redirected. The discipline of perception is perhaps the most powerful tool any person can develop, because it determines whether you experience your life as a series of things happening to you, or a series of opportunities to practice excellence. Every obstacle becomes a training ground. Every setback becomes a chance to demonstrate your character. Every crisis becomes a moment to prove your growth. I trained myself to ask different questions when challenges arose. Instead of why is this happening to me, I asked how can this make me stronger? Instead of this isn't fair, I asked what can this teach me? Instead of when will this end, I asked how can I use this? This isn't about positive thinking or pretending that difficulties don't matter. It's about recognizing that your interpretation of events has more power over your life than the events themselves. Two people can face identical circumstances and have completely different experiences, based solely on how they choose to perceive what's happening. Most people give away this power without realizing it. They let external circumstances dictate their internal state. They allow other people's actions to determine their mood. They permit temporary setbacks to define their identity. They hand control of their success to forces outside themselves. But when you master the discipline of perception, you become unstoppable because no external force can touch your inner strength. You develop what I call the philosopher's advantage, the ability to find opportunity in every obstacle, wisdom in every challenge, and strength in every test. Start practicing this today. When something goes wrong, pause before reacting. Ask yourself, is this an obstacle or an opportunity? What story am I telling myself about this situation? How might someone I admire interpret this same event? What if this difficulty is exactly what I need to grow? Your perception is your power. Guard it carefully, train it constantly, and watch as your entire experience of life transforms. The third habit that created unstoppable success in my life came from a profound realization that shattered everything I thought I knew about achievement. External success without virtue is not just meaningless, it's actively harmful to your soul. I learned this lesson during one of the most magnificent celebrations in Roman history. After our victories in Germania, the Senate voted me a triumph, the highest honor the empire could bestow. I rode through the streets of Rome in a golden chariot, while crowds cheered and slaves whispered behind me, "Remember, you are mortal," to keep me humble. But as I sat in that golden chariot, wearing the crown of Jupiter himself, something felt fundamentally wrong. The external markers of success were all there: the military victories, the adoring crowds, the ultimate recognition from the most powerful civilization on earth. Yet I felt empty, disconnected from the person I wanted to be. That night, alone, in the imperial palace, I wrote in my journal, "Remember that very little disturbs the wise man, for he is not stirred by the loss of external things, because he knows that his essence lies in his character, not in his possessions." This was when I truly understood what my Stoic teachers had been trying to tell me. Virtue is the only reliable foundation for human flourishing. Everything else, wealth, fame, power, recognition, can be taken away by circumstances beyond your control. But your character, your integrity, your commitment to doing what's right regardless of consequences, these belong to you completely. The 4 cardinal virtues became my guide: wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. These weren't abstract philosophical concepts, but practical tools for making decisions under pressure. When facing any choice, I would ask, does this serve wisdom by helping me understand truth? Does it serve justice by treating others fairly? Does it require courage to do what's right despite difficulty? Does it demonstrate temperance by avoiding excess? I discovered that when you make virtue your primary goal, success becomes inevitable, not because good things always happen to good people, but because you develop the character traits that naturally lead to achievement. Wisdom helps you make better decisions. Justice builds trust and loyalty. Courage enables you to take necessary risks and persist through setbacks. Temperance keeps you from being corrupted by success or destroyed by failure. Most people reverse this order. They chase external success first, hoping it will somehow make them virtuous later. They think wealth will make them generous, power will make them just, fame will make them wise, but it doesn't work that way. External success without virtue as its foundation corrupts rather than elevates. I've seen wealthy people who were miserable because they had no character to enjoy their wealth. I've seen powerful people who were weak because they had never developed inner strength. I've seen famous people who were empty because they had confused recognition with worth. But I've also seen people with very little external success who lived rich, meaningful lives because they had built their identity on virtue rather than outcomes. They couldn't be shaken by setbacks because their worth didn't depend on external validation. They couldn't be corrupted by success because their values remained constant regardless of circumstances. This is why virtue creates unstoppable success. When your foundation is unshakable, you can build as high as you want without fear of collapse. When your worth comes from your character rather than your achievements, you're free to take the risks necessary for breakthrough success. When you're guided by principles rather than circumstances, you can navigate any storm. Start building your virtue-based success today. Before making any significant decision, ask yourself, does this align with my deepest values? Will I be proud of this choice in 10 years? Am I choosing this because it's right or because it's easy? Your character is your destiny. Invest in it accordingly. The 4th habit that forged my unstoppable success came from humanity's greatest teacher, death itself. During the Antonine Plague, when the angel of death stalked every Roman household, I learned that awareness of mortality is not morbid, it's the ultimate motivator for meaningful achievement. The plague arrived in the 7th year of my reign, carried by soldiers returning from campaigns in the east. Within months, it spread throughout the empire, killing as many as 5 million people, including my adoptive brother and co-emperor, Lucius Verus. Every day, I awoke knowing that I might not see another sunset, that this conversation might be my last, that today's decisions could be my final legacy. Most people run from thoughts of death, believing that if they don't think about it, somehow it won't happen. They live as if they have unlimited time, postponing important conversations, delaying meaningful projects, avoiding difficult but necessary choices. They sleepwalk through their lives because they've convinced themselves that death is something that happens to other people, in some distant future that will never arrive. But I learned to embrace what the Stoics call memento mori, remember, that you will die, not as a source of fear, but as a source of clarity. When you truly understand that your time is limited, everything that matters becomes crystal clear, and everything that doesn't matter falls away. I began each day by reminding myself, you could die today. Let this determine what you do and say and think. This wasn't pessimism, was realism that led to urgency. When you know that your opportunities are finite, you stop wasting them on trivial pursuits. When you understand that your relationships could end at any moment, you treat people with the love and respect they deserve. When you realize that your impact must be made now or never, you find the courage to attempt great things. The plague taught me that death is not the opposite of life's greatest teacher. Every funeral I attended, every friend I lost, every moment I spent comforting the grieving families of my subjects, reminded me that life's meaning comes not from its length, but from its depth, not from what you accumulate, but from what you contribute, not from avoiding death, but from making death meaningful through how you live. I kept a small skull on my desk, not to frighten visitors, but to remind myself of what truly matters. When senators brought me petty political disputes, I would glance at that skull and ask, will this matter when I'm gone? When advisors urged me to pursue policies that would benefit me personally but harm the empire, I would remember my mortality and choose the path that would outlast my physical existence. This awareness of death became my secret weapon for unstoppable success because it eliminated all the distractions that derail most people. I couldn't afford to hold grudges. Life was too short. I couldn't postpone difficult decisions. Time was too precious. I couldn't avoid necessary risks. The ultimate risk was living a meaningless life. Death awareness also freed me from the fear of failure, because I understood that the only real failure was never attempting something worth failing at. When you know your time is limited, the risk of embarrassment seems trivial compared to the risk of regret. When you understand that you'll be judged by your legacy rather than your temporary setbacks, you find the courage to pursue what matters. Most start practicing memento mori today, not to become morbid, but to become alive. Ask yourself, if I only had 1 year left, what would I change about how I'm living? What conversations would I have? What projects would I pursue? What would I stop doing immediately? Remember, you are dying, and that is why you must truly live. Let mortality motivate you toward meaning, urgency toward excellence, and the awareness of death toward the creation of life worth remembering. The fifth habit that created unstoppable success in my life was born in a moment of absolute presence during the Battle of Carnuntum, when I learned that the only time you can actually influence your destiny is right now. The Germanic tribes had launched their most aggressive assault yet, threatening to break through our northern defenses and march on Rome itself. As I stood with my generals, reviewing battle plans that could determine the fate of the empire, my mind began to wander. I started thinking about the mistakes that had led to this crisis, worrying about the catastrophic consequences if we failed, imagining the historians who would judge my decisions decades from now. Then, in a moment of clarity that changed everything, I realized I was everywhere except where I needed to be, here, now, in this moment where actual decisions could be made and real actions could be taken. I had been living in the past, replaying choices I couldn't change. I had been living in the future, anxious about outcomes I couldn't control. The only place I hadn't been living was the present moment, the only place where life actually happens, where decisions are made, where influence can be exercised. This is the trap that destroys most people's effectiveness. They give away their power to times that don't exist. They sacrifice their ability to act now because they're mentally rehearsing regrets about yesterday or anxieties about tomorrow. They miss the opportunities that are right in front of them because they're focused on opportunities that have passed or might never come. I began to train myself in what I came to call present moment mastery, the ability to bring my full attention to whatever was happening right now. When I was in a council meeting, I was completely in that meeting, not thinking about the next appointment or the previous conversation. When I was reviewing military reports, my entire mind was focused on those reports, not wandering to personal concerns or future plans. This practice transformed my effectiveness immediately. When you give your complete attention to the current moment, you see opportunities that scattered attention misses. You make connections that divided focus can't perceive. You respond with wisdom instead of reacting from habit. You become fully present to the only time when you actually have power. During battles, this presence meant the difference between victory and defeat. A commander who is thinking about past losses or future fears cannot see the tactical opportunities that are emerging right now. But a commander who is completely present can spot the enemy's weakness, recognize the perfect moment to advance, adjust strategy based on real-time information rather than outdated assumptions. The same principle applies to every area of achievement. The entrepreneur who is fully present during client meetings builds stronger relationships than the one who is mentally preparing for the next pitch. The leader who gives complete attention to team members earns more loyalty than the one who is distracted by phone notifications. The person who is entirely focused on their current project produces better results than the one who is scattered across multiple concerns. I learned to use my breath as an anchor to the present moment. When I noticed my mind drifting to past regrets or future anxieties, I would focus on the sensation of breathing something that only exists now. I would ask myself, what does this moment require of me? Not what I wished it required, not what I feared it might require, but what it actually required right now. Most people think they're too busy to be present, but the opposite is true. You're too busy because you're not present. When your attention is scattered across multiple times and concerns, everything takes longer and requires more effort. When you're fully present, you work with efficiency and clarity that scattered attention can never achieve. Start practicing present moment mastery today. When you're in a conversation, be completely in that conversation. When you're working on a project, give it your total focus. When you're making a decision, base it on current reality rather than past patterns or future projections. The present moment is where your life is happening. It's where your power lies. It's where unstoppable success is created, one fully engaged moment at a time. The sixth habit that forged my unstoppable success was learned in the Senate House. When a trusted advisor betrayed me publicly, and I discovered that mastering your emotions is the difference between ruling your life and being ruled by it. Senator Cassius had been one of my closest counselors, a man I had elevated to positions of honor and trust. When reports reached me that he was spreading rumors about my military leadership and questioning my decisions in private meetings, I felt the familiar surge of anger rising in my chest. The betrayal cut deep not just because of the political damage, but because I had genuinely cared for this man as a friend. In that moment, I had a choice that would define my character and my effectiveness as a leader. I could let anger control my response, striking back with the full power of imperial authority to destroy this man who had wounded me. Or I could practice what my Stoic teachers had trained me to do, examine the emotion without being controlled by it. I withdrew to my private chambers and wrote in my journal, "How much trouble he avoids who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does, but only to what he does himself." This wasn't about suppressing my anger or pretending it didn't exist. It was about choosing my response based on wisdom rather than emotion. Emotional discipline is not emotional suppression. It's the practice of feeling your emotions fully while choosing your actions consciously. Most people are slaves to their emotional reactions, letting momentary feelings determine permanent decisions. They respond to criticism with defensiveness, to setbacks with despair, to success with arrogance, to betrayal with revenge. They give away their power to whoever or whatever can trigger their emotions. But I learned to create space between feeling and action, between stimulus and response. When anger arose, I would acknowledge it. I notice I'm feeling angry about this betrayal. When fear emerged about military campaigns, I would recognize it. I observe that I'm anxious about the outcome of this battle. When pride swelled after victories, I would note it. I see that I'm becoming attached to this praise. This practice of emotional awareness gave me a crucial advantage. I could access the information that emotions provide without being hijacked by their intensity. Anger often signals that our boundaries have been violated useful information, but acting from anger usually makes the situation worse. Fear often indicates real dangers that need attention-valuable data, but deciding from fear leads to poor choices. Pride can point to genuine achievements, worth celebrating helpful feedback, but leading from pride creates blindness to necessary improvements. During the most challenging years of my reign, this emotional discipline became my secret weapon. When plague devastated the empire, I felt grief for the suffering of my people. But I didn't let that grief paralyze my decision-making. When Germanic tribes threatened our borders, I acknowledged my fear about the empire's security, but I didn't let that fear drive me to rash military action. When senators praised my philosophical writings, I appreciated their recognition, but I didn't let their flattery inflate my ego or cloud my judgment. I developed specific practices for emotional regulation. When strong emotions arose, I would ask myself, what is this emotion trying to tell me? What information does it contain? What would wisdom do in this situation? How will I feel about my response in 10 years? I would often write about challenging situations, using my journal as a tool for processing emotions and finding clarity. The betrayal by Senator Cassius became a perfect test of these principles. Instead of destroying him, I chose to transfer him to a distant province where he could serve the empire usefully without access to sensitive information. I addressed his concerns about my military strategy by bringing in additional advisors and improving our communication with the Senate. I used his betrayal as information about how my leadership was being perceived and adjusted accordingly. Most successful people understand this principle intuitively. They've learned to respond rather than react, to choose their emotional state rather than being chosen by it. They feel their emotions deeply, but act from their values consistently. They understand that emotional mastery is not about becoming cold or unfeeling. It's about becoming more effective and more authentically yourself. Start practicing emotional discipline today. When strong emotions arise, pause before acting. Ask yourself, what is this emotion telling me? What would my best self do in this situation? How can I honor both my feelings and my values? Your emotions are valuable messengers, but they don't have to be your masters. True power lies not in never feeling difficult emotions, but in maintaining your ability to choose your response, regardless of what you're feeling. The seventh habit that created unstoppable success in my life was born from a paradox that took me years to understand. The more you focus on serving something greater than yourself, the more successful you become in ways that actually matter. This revelation came during my darkest hour as emperor, when the Antonine Plague had killed millions of my subjects, and I questioned whether my efforts to lead were making any difference at all. I sat in the imperial palace, surrounded by luxury that felt meaningless while people suffered in the streets below, and asked myself the question that would transform my understanding of leadership. Am I ruling for myself or for them? The honest answer frightened me. Despite my philosophical training, despite my commitment to Stoic principles, I realized that much of my energy was still focused on how my decisions would affect my reputation, my legacy, my place in history. I was serving the empire, yes, but I was serving myself through the empire. That night, I wrote what would become one of my most important meditations. What is not good for the hive cannot be good for the bee. This simple principle revolutionized my approach to everything, not just governing, but living. When your primary motivation shifts from self-advancement to collective contribution, when you stop asking, what's in this for me, and start asking, how can this serve something larger, everything changes. I began to redesign my daily schedule around service rather than personal preference. Instead of focusing on projects that would enhance my philosophical reputation, I dedicated time to administrative reforms that would improve ordinary citizens' lives. Instead of surrounding myself with intellectuals who stimulated my thinking, I made myself accessible to merchants, farmers, and soldiers whose practical needs could inform better policies. Instead of pursuing military campaigns that would add glory to my name, I focused on defensive strategies that would protect my people's security. This shift created what I came to call the service paradox. The more I focused on serving others, the more fulfilled and effective I became personally. When your motivation is larger than your ego, you tap into energy sources that self-centered ambition can never access. When you're working for something that will outlast your lifetime, you find strength to persist through setbacks that would crush purely personal motivation. Service to the greater good also provides clarity that self-focused goals cannot match. When faced with difficult decisions, I no longer had to wrestle with competing personal desires, simply asked what would best serve the empire's long-term flourishing. When senators proposed policies that would benefit the wealthy at the expense of the poor, the choice was clear. When generals urged military action that would boost our prestige but cost unnecessary lives, the decision was obvious. This principle transformed not just my public leadership, but my private relationships. Instead of evaluating friendships based on what others could do for me, I focused on what I could contribute to their growth and happiness. Instead of viewing my marriage as a source of personal satisfaction, I approached it as an opportunity to support my wife's flourishing. Instead of seeing my role as father as a chance to create heirs who would honor my memory, I focused on raising children who would contribute meaningfully to the world. The results were extraordinary. When people sense that you're genuinely focused on their welfare rather than your own advancement, they respond with loyalty and effort that no amount of manipulation or incentive can create. When your team knows that you're willing to sacrifice personal credit for collective success, they'll go beyond what duty requires because they want to, not because they have to. I've observed this pattern throughout history. The leaders who achieve the most lasting success are those who subordinate their personal agenda to a larger mission. They build organizations that outlast their tenure, create movements that continue after their death, inspire others to excellence because they model service rather than selfishness. But service to the greater good is not self-sacrifice. When you contribute to something larger than yourself, you become part of something eternal. When you serve the common good, you discover that your individual good is inseparable from the collective flourishing. When you focus on what you can give rather than what you can get, you receive more than you ever imagined possible. Start practicing this habit today. In every situation, ask yourself, how can this serve something larger than my immediate self-interest? What would contribute most to the common good? How can I use my talents and position to benefit others? Your greatest success will come not from what you achieve for yourself, but from what you enable others to achieve through your service. True fulfillment comes from knowing that your life has made other lives better. The eighth habit that forged my unstoppable success came from a humbling realization that arrived with absolute power. The moment you think you know enough is the moment you become dangerous to yourself and everyone who depends on you. I learned this lesson during my first major crisis as sole emperor, when a grain shortage threatened to cause riots in Rome, despite years of preparation for leadership, despite the finest education the empire could provide, despite access to the greatest minds of my generation. I realized I had no practical knowledge about grain distribution, supply chain logistics, or crowd management during civil unrest. That night, as I sat surrounded by scrolls and struggling to understand the complexities of feeding 1 million people, I had an epiphany that would shape the rest of my reign. True power comes not from what you already know, but from your commitment to keep learning what you need to know. The next morning, I did something that shocked my advisors. I invited the head of the Grain Merchants Guild, the port supervisor, and several warehouse managers to teach me their trades. I didn't just want their recommendations, I wanted to understand the principles underlying their expertise. I spent days in the granaries, learning how to evaluate wheat quality. I studied shipping schedules and weather patterns. I observed the behavior of crowds during food distributions. My advisors thought I was wasting time on details beneath an emperor's attention, but I understood something they didn't. In a rapidly changing world, the leaders who survive and thrive are those who never stop learning. The moment you decide you've learned enough, you begin the process of becoming irrelevant. This commitment to continuous learning became one of my greatest competitive advantages. While other rulers relied on outdated knowledge and rigid thinking, I constantly absorbed new information and adapted my approaches. When the Germanic tribes changed their tactics, I studied their innovations and incorporated the best elements into our own strategy. When the plague required unprecedented public health measures, I learned from doctors and philosophers and administrators to develop comprehensive responses. I established what I called my ignorance inventory, a regular assessment of what I didn't know but needed to learn. Each month, I would list the challenges facing the empire and honestly evaluate my knowledge gaps. Then I would systematically seek out teachers who could fill those gaps. I learned military engineering from our best architects, diplomatic protocols from experienced ambassadors, financial management from successful merchants. The key insight was this: learning accelerates rather than slows with position and success. The higher you rise, the more complex your challenges become, and the more you need to understand about subjects far beyond your original expertise. The successful person who stops learning is like a general who stops gathering intelligence. Initially strong, but inevitably overwhelmed by forces they failed to understand. I also discovered that the best learning comes from the intersection of theory and practice. Reading about military strategy was valuable, but it meant nothing until I combined it with actual battlefield experience. Studying Stoic philosophy was important, but it only became powerful when I applied those principles to real decisions under genuine pressure. Academic knowledge without practical application is mere intellectual entertainment. My daily schedule always included time for learning. Even during the most chaotic periods, I protected hours for reading, reflection, and conversation with experts. I treated learning not as a luxury for quiet times, but as an essential tool for handling difficult times. The more challenging my circumstances, the more aggressively I pursued new knowledge and fresh perspectives. I learned to ask better questions. Instead of "what do I think about this?" I asked "what don't I understand about this situation?" Instead of "how can I apply what I already know?" I asked "what do I need to learn to handle this effectively?" Instead of "who agrees with my assessment?" I asked "who can teach me something I don't know?" This habit also protected me from the arrogance that destroys many successful people. When you're constantly learning, you're constantly reminded of how much you don't know. This humility keeps you open to correction, receptive to feedback, and willing to change course when evidence suggests a better path. Pride in past learning can block future learning, but humility about current knowledge opens unlimited growth. The most successful people I've observed share this commitment to lifelong learning. They read voraciously, seek out mentors and advisors, study their failures as intensively as their successes, and remain curious about fields far from their expertise. They understand that in a world of constant change, the ability to learn quickly is more valuable than any fixed body of knowledge. Start strengthening your learning habit today. Identify the knowledge gaps that are limiting your progress. Seek out teachers who can accelerate your understanding. Read books that challenge your assumptions. Ask questions that reveal your ignorance rather than demonstrate your expertise. Remember, the person you'll become is determined by what you choose to learn. Invest in your learning, and everything else becomes possible. The 9th habit that created unstoppable success in my life was forged in the brutality of the Marcomannic Wars, where I learned that resilience is not about avoiding hardship, it's about developing the strength to transform hardship into advantage. For 8 years, I lived in military camps along the Danube frontier, far from the comforts of Rome, leading campaigns against Germanic tribes who had mastered the art of asymmetric warfare. These were not the glorious battles of legend, with clear victories and heroic charges. These were grinding, exhausting conflicts where progress was measured in miles rather than territories, where every gain was paid for with Roman blood, where the very survival of the empire hung in the balance. During the darkest winter of the campaign, when supply lines were cut and our forces were trapped in hostile territory with dwindling food and mounting casualties, I wrote in my journal, "The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it. Adapt yourself to the life you've been given, but love the people with whom you share it." This was my breakthrough moment about resilience. I had been thinking of adversity as something to endure until I could return to normal circumstances. But I realized that adversity was not interrupting my life, it was creating my life. The challenges I faced were not obstacles to my development as a leader and philosopher. They were the very forge in which that development occurred. I began to train myself to see hardships as sparring partners rather than enemies. Just as a boxer becomes stronger by facing progressively tougher opponents, I could become more capable by encountering progressively greater challenges. The Germanic tribes weren't just threatening the empire, they were testing whether I had the character to protect it. The plague wasn't just killing my subjects, it was revealing whether I had the wisdom to lead during crisis. The political betrayals weren't just personal wounds, they were opportunities to practice forgiveness and strategic thinking. This shift in perspective transformed my relationship with difficulty. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" I began asking, "What is this teaching me?" Instead of hoping for easier circumstances, I focused on becoming stronger within current circumstances. Instead of waiting for the storm to pass, I learnt to dance in the rain. I developed what I called adversity preparation, the practice of mentally rehearsing difficulties before they arrived, so I would be psychologically ready when they inevitably came. Each morning, I would imagine potential setbacks and practice my response. If negotiations with tribal leaders failed, how would I maintain diplomatic composure? If our military tactics proved ineffective, how would I adapt our strategy? If advisors brought me devastating news, how would I process it without becoming paralyzed? This preparation prevented me from being emotionally overwhelmed when difficulties actually occurred, because I had already imagined these scenarios and planned my responses. I could act from wisdom rather than panic when they became reality. The unexpected became expected, the shocking became manageable, the overwhelming became just another challenge to meet with equanimity. But resilience is not just about surviving adversity, it's about extracting value from it. Every setback contains information about what isn't working and hints about what might work better. Every failure reveals assumptions that need questioning and skills that need developing. Every crisis exposes strengths you didn't know you had and weaknesses you need to address. During those years on the frontier, I learned more about leadership, strategy, human nature, and my own character than I had in decades of peacetime study. The adversity became my greatest teacher, forcing me to develop capabilities I never would have needed in comfortable circumstances. The man who returned to Rome was fundamentally different from the one who had left stronger, wiser, more compassionate, more effective. I also discovered that resilience is contagious. When soldiers saw that their emperor could maintain composure and determination despite overwhelming challenges, their own resilience increased. When senators observed that setbacks didn't break my spirit or cloud my judgment, they gained confidence in our collective ability to weather any storm. Leadership during adversity is not about pretending everything is fine. It's about demonstrating that difficulties can be faced and overcome. The most successful people I've observed share this approach to adversity. They don't seek out hardship, but they don't run from it either. They understand that every significant achievement requires overcoming significant obstacles. They've learned to see setbacks as setups for comebacks, failures as tuition for wisdom, crises as crucibles for character development. Start building your resilience today. When difficulties arise, ask yourself, what can this teach me? How can this make me stronger? What opportunities might be hidden in this challenge? Stop waiting for easy circumstances to begin pursuing your dreams. Use current circumstances, however difficult, as the raw material for building the character that dreams require. Remember, the same hammer that shatters glass forges steel. Your response to adversity determines which you become. The 10th habit that forged my unstoppable success was mastered during the most consequential decision of my reign. When I learned that the quality of your life is determined by the quality of your decisions, and the quality of your decisions depends on your ability to think clearly under pressure. The crisis came in my 18th year as emperor, when Avidius Cassius, the governor of Syria, declared himself emperor after receiving false reports of my death during the Germanic campaigns. Half the eastern provinces supported his rebellion, threatening to split the empire in two. My advisors urged immediate military action. March east with our legions and crush the rebellion before it could spread further. The emotional response was clear. I felt betrayed by a man I had trusted, angry at his treachery, and pressured to respond with overwhelming force to demonstrate imperial strength. Every instinct screamed for swift, decisive violence. But I had learned to pause between impulse and action, to create space for rational analysis even when emotions ran high. I withdrew to my private chambers and applied the decision-making framework I had developed over years of philosophical study and practical leadership. First, I clarified the actual problem. This was not primarily about my wounded pride or Cassius's betrayal. It was about preserving the unity and stability of the empire with minimal cost in Roman lives. Next, I gathered complete information, sending trusted agents to assess the actual scope of support for the rebellion, the loyalty of key military commanders, and the underlying grievances that had made Cassius's uprising possible. Most leaders make decisions based on incomplete data because they're impatient or afraid that delay will be seen as weakness. But I had learned that premature action based on insufficient information usually creates larger problems than thoughtful delay. Then I generated multiple options beyond the obvious choice of military intervention. Could diplomatic negotiation resolve this without bloodshed? Could political concessions address the legitimate concerns that had enabled the rebellion? Could economic incentives win back the rebellious provinces? Could strategic patience allow the rebellion to collapse under its own contradictions? For each option, I analyzed potential consequences, not just for the immediate crisis, but for the long-term health of the empire. Military action might restore order quickly, but could create martyrs and resentment that would fuel future rebellions. Negotiation might appear weak, but could preserve lives and resources for more important challenges. Economic concessions might be expensive, but could be cheaper than warfare and more effective at building lasting loyalty. I also examined my own biases and emotional reactions that might distort my judgment. Was my preference for negotiation based on philosophical idealism that ignored practical realities? Was my anger at Cassius pushing me toward disproportionate punishment? Was my concern for my historical reputation influencing my assessment of what the empire actually needed? Finally, I made my decision using what I called the 10-year test. Which choice would I be most proud of when I looked back a decade later? Which option best aligned with my deepest values while serving the empire's true interests? Which path required the courage to do what was right rather than what was expected? I chose negotiation backed by measured force, sending ambassadors to offer amnesty to rebels who surrendered while slowly moving legions east to demonstrate that diplomacy came from strength, not weakness. Before my forces could engage, Cassius was assassinated by his own officers, and the rebellion collapsed. The provinces returned to imperial control without a major battle, preserving thousands of lives and millions in treasury funds. This experience crystallized my understanding of rational decision-making as a systematic practice rather than an innate talent. Good decisions don't happen by accident. They result from disciplined thinking processes that can be learned and improved. Poor decisions usually stem from emotional reactions, incomplete information, limited options, or failure to consider long-term consequences. I developed specific practices to improve my decision-making under pressure. I created mandatory waiting periods for major choices, refusing to make important decisions while angry, fearful, or euphoric. I appointed devil's advocates whose job was to argue against my initial preferences. I required my advisors to present at least 3 options for every significant issue, preventing false choices between action and inaction. I also learned to separate reversible from irreversible decisions. For choices that could be undone if they proved wrong, I acted quickly with the understanding that course corrections were possible. But for decisions with permanent consequences, declarations of war, major legal reforms, key appointments, I took as much time as necessary to think thoroughly, regardless of external pressure, to decide rapidly. The most successful people I've observed share this commitment to rational decision-making. They've learned to pause between stimulus and response, to gather relevant information before acting, to consider multiple options rather than accepting false choices, and to think systematically about consequences rather than reacting emotionally to immediate circumstances. Your decisions create your destiny. Every choice you make either moves you toward your goals or away from them, strengthens your character or weakens it, creates opportunities or closes them. Small decisions compound into life patterns. Major decisions can change everything instantly. Start improving your decision-making today. Before your next important choice, pause to clarify the real problem. Gather complete information, generate multiple options, analyze consequences, examine your biases, and apply your deepest values. The few extra minutes you spend thinking can save years of dealing with the consequences of poor choices. Remember, you are where you are because of the decisions you've made. You'll be where you want to be by making better decisions starting now. Now that I have shared with you the 10 fundamental habits that create unstoppable success, I must teach you the most important principle of all: how to build what I call the inner citadel, a fortress of the mind that no external force can breach, no circumstance can overwhelm, no setback can destroy. This concept came to me during the siege of Carnuntum, as I watched our military engineers construct massive stone fortifications to protect our winter camp from barbarian attacks. These walls could withstand battering rams, siege towers, and months of assault. But as I observed their construction, I realized that I needed to build something even stronger. Mental fortifications that could protect my peace of mind, my clarity of judgment, and my strength of character from the endless sieges that life brings to every person who dares to achieve something meaningful. The inner citadel is not a place you retreat to when things go wrong. It's a state of mind you carry with you everywhere, a core of unshakable strength that remains constant regardless of external circumstances. It's built from the 10 habits I've shared with you, but it's more than the sum of those parts. It's the integration of all Stoic principles into a unified approach to living that makes you truly unstoppable. The foundation of your inner citadel is the recognition that there are only 2 kinds of things in this world: those within your control and those beyond your control. Within your control are your thoughts, your choices, your responses, your character, your effort. Beyond your control are other people's actions, natural disasters, economic conditions, political events, and most of the outcomes you achieve despite your best efforts. Most people exhaust themselves trying to control what they cannot control while neglecting what they can control. They worry about other people's opinions while ignoring their own character development. They stress about market conditions while failing to improve their skills. They complain about political leaders while avoiding personal responsibility for their own lives. But when you build your inner citadel properly, you become like a master chess player who focuses entirely on making the best possible moves, while remaining unattached to whether those moves lead to victory or defeat. You control what you can control with total commitment, while accepting what you cannot control with complete equanimity. The walls of your inner citadel are built from virtue, commitment to do what is right, regardless of consequences. When your worth comes from your character rather than your achievements, external setbacks cannot touch your fundamental sense of self. When your decisions are guided by principles rather than outcomes, temporary failures cannot shake your long-term direction. When your happiness depends on living according to your values rather than getting what you want, disappointment becomes impossible. The garrison of your inner citadel consists of the habits I've taught you. Morning reflection prepares your mind for daily challenges. Disciplined perception ensures you see opportunities rather than just obstacles. Virtue as your foundation keeps you centered during both success and failure. Memento mori reminds you what truly matters. Present moment mastery keeps you focused on where your power actually lies. Emotional discipline prevents your feelings from becoming your master. Service to the greater good connects you to purposes larger than yourself. Continuous learning keeps you growing and adapting. Resilience through adversity transforms hardships into strength. Rational decision-making ensures your choices serve your highest good. When all these elements work together, they create something magnificent, a human being who cannot be broken by circumstances, discouraged by setbacks, corrupted by success, or deflected from their purpose by external pressures. This is what it means to be truly free, not the absence of constraints, but the presence of inner strength that transcends any constraint. I have tested this inner citadel through plague and war, betrayal and loss, the burdens of absolute power and the inevitability of death. I can tell you from direct experience that it works. When you build these mental fortifications properly, you discover a peace that surpasses understanding, a strength that never fails, a joy that no circumstance can steal. Your inner citadel also becomes a source of strength for others. When people see someone who remains calm in chaos, hopeful in difficulty, and principled under pressure, it reminds them that such strength is possible. Your example becomes their inspiration. Your stability becomes their anchor. Your character becomes their teacher. The beautiful paradox is this: when you stop trying to control everything outside yourself and focus entirely on controlling what's within yourself, you actually gain more influence over external circumstances. People trust leaders who are not desperate for approval. They follow those who are not driven by fear. They respect strength that doesn't need to prove itself through dominance. Begin building your inner citadel today. Start with one habit, master it completely, then add another. Focus on what you can control while accepting what you cannot. Make virtue your foundation and character your treasure. Create mental fortifications strong enough to protect your peace of mind from any storm. Remember, external circumstances will always change, but your inner citadel can remain unshakable forever. This is where your true power lies, where your lasting peace resides, where your unstoppable success begins. Let me share with you the most dangerous trap that destroys successful people, and how I learned to navigate what I call the emperor's paradox. The more power you gain, the more humility you need to wield it wisely. This lesson came to me during the height of my authority, when the first commanded legions that could conquer nations, when my word was law for 60 million people, when senators and kings sought my favor and poets composed verses to my glory. I sat in a palace where every surface was marble or gold, surrounded by servants who existed to fulfill my every desire, holding power that previous generations could only imagine. Yet each morning I ate from a simple wooden bowl and drank from a clay cup, just as I had as a student. My advisors thought this was eccentric, perhaps even beneath the dignity of imperial office. They couldn't understand why someone with unlimited access to luxury would choose simplicity, why someone who could command anything would voluntarily limit his desires. But I had learned something that most successful people never discover. External power without inner restraint doesn't create freedom, it creates slavery to your own appetites. The emperor who indulges every whim becomes a prisoner of his indulgences. The leader who believes his own propaganda becomes incapable of seeing reality. The person who confuses position with worth becomes hollow inside, no matter how impressive they appear outside. The paradox is this: the capabilities that help you gain power, ambition, confidence, assertiveness, can become the very things that destroy you once you have power. Ambition becomes greed, confidence becomes arrogance, assertiveness becomes tyranny. The qualities that make you successful can make you unsuccessful if you don't balance them with their opposites. I discovered that true power requires voluntary powerlessness. The more authority I held, the more I needed to practice submission to truth, to virtue, to the greater good, to the needs of people who couldn't defend themselves. The more people praised me, the more I needed to remember my limitations and mortality. The more others sought my approval, the more I needed to remain independent of their flattery. This is why I developed practices of voluntary discomfort and deliberate humility. I would sleep on hard ground during military campaigns, not because comfort wasn't available, but because I needed to remember that my well-being didn't depend on luxury. I would walk among common soldiers without ceremony, not for public relations, but because I needed to stay connected to the reality of people's lives beyond the palace walls. I made it a practice to seek out people who would tell me the truth rather than what I wanted to hear. I appointed advisors whose job was to disagree with me, to question my assumptions, to remind me when I was wrong. I created systems that would check my power rather than amplify it, understanding that absolute power corrupts absolutely not because powerful people are evil, but because isolation from feedback and consequences inevitably distorts judgment. The wooden bowl became my daily reminder that my worth as a human being had nothing to do with my position as emperor. I was not great because I ruled an empire. If anything, ruling an empire was my opportunity to demonstrate whatever greatness I had developed as a person. The power was temporary, the responsibility was immense, but my character was what would outlast both. I learned to hold authority lightly, like a tool to be used for worthy purposes, rather than a treasure to be hoarded for personal satisfaction. Every decision I made, I asked myself, am I using this power to serve something greater than myself? Would I make this same choice if I had no authority to enforce it? Will this action make me proud when I look back on it from my deathbed? This approach to power created a strange result. The more I focused on service rather than dominance, the more respect I earned. The more I acknowledged my limitations, the more people trusted my judgment. The more I practiced humility, the more authority I actually possessed. True power, I discovered, comes not from the ability to force compliance, but from the character that inspires voluntary cooperation. The emperor's paradox applies to every level of success, not just political power. The more money you make, the more important it becomes to remember what money can't buy. The more recognition you receive, the more crucial it becomes to stay grounded in reality. The more influence you gain, the more responsibility you have to use that influence wisely. I've watched countless people destroy themselves with success because they never learned this balance. They let achievement go to their heads, mistake temporary advantages for permanent worth, and forget that every position of power is temporary while character is eternal. They become prisoners of their own image, slaves to their own appetites, isolated by their own importance. But success doesn't have to corrupt if you approach it with the right mindset. Use your achievements as opportunities to practice virtue, rather than indulge ego. Let recognition remind you of your responsibility, rather than inflate your self-importance. Allow influence to deepen your humility, rather than amplify your arrogance. Start practicing this balance today. With whatever power you have over employees, family members, your own choices, ask yourself, how can I use this authority to serve, rather than to be served? How can I stay grounded while rising higher? How can I remain human while gaining superhuman capabilities? Remember, the measure of your character is not what you do when you have no power, but what you do when you have all the power. True greatness lies not in commanding others, but in commanding yourself. As my time as emperor draws toward its end, I must share with you the perspective that has given me the greatest peace and the clearest judgment. Learning to view your current struggles from the vantage point of eternity, and understanding that your legacy is not what you achieve, but what you make possible for others. This understanding came to me during the darkest period of the Germanic Wars, when I was 50 years old and had been fighting on the frontier for 6 years. My body was weakening from the constant stress of campaign life. My closest advisors were dying of age and disease, and I wondered whether all our sacrifices were making any meaningful difference. The barbarian tribes seemed endless. Our progress was measured in yards rather than miles, and I questioned whether future generations would even remember these struggles. That night, alone in my tent, while snow fell outside and enemy fires flickered in the distance, I wrote in my journal, "Remember how brief life is, how vast the universe. What is the longest life compared to eternity? What are our greatest achievements compared to the span of time? What matters is not whether we are remembered, but whether we are worthy of being remembered." This shift to temporal perspective, viewing present circumstances from the standpoint of long-term consequences, transformed my entire approach to leadership and life. Instead of asking, how does this affect me today, I began asking, how will this matter in 100 years? Instead of focusing on immediate results, I concentrated on creating conditions for long-term flourishing. Instead of worrying about my personal reputation, I focused on building institutions that would outlast my lifetime. The Germanic campaigns suddenly made perfect sense from this expanded perspective. We weren't just fighting for temporary military victories. We were establishing precedents for how Rome would handle future threats. We weren't just defending current borders, we were creating stability that would allow future generations to pursue philosophy, art, and commerce instead of constant warfare. We weren't just preserving the empire as it was, we were shaping what it could become. This temporal perspective also liberated me from the anxiety that destroys most leaders, the desperate need for immediate validation and quick results. When you understand that meaningful change occurs over decades and centuries rather than months and years, you can persist through setbacks that would crush someone focused only on short-term outcomes. When you know that your true legacy will be determined by principles you establish rather than battles you win, you make different choices about how to use your time and energy. I began to see my role as emperor not as the culmination of my life's work, but as a bridge between the wisdom of previous generations and the needs of future ones. My job was not to solve every problem permanently, but to handle current challenges while creating better conditions for those who would come after me. I was a temporary custodian of institutions and ideas that had existed before me and would continue after I was gone. This perspective changed how I evaluated success and failure. The policies that made me popular with current citizens but would burden future generations were failures, regardless of their immediate positive reception. The decisions that cost me political support but would benefit people not yet born were successes, even if they seemed like failures in the moment. The reforms that would take decades to show their value were more important than the quick fixes that would provide immediate relief. I started asking different questions about every major decision. What precedent does this set for future leaders? What kind of empire am I creating for my successors to inherit? What principles am I establishing that will guide decisions long after I'm gone? How will this choice look to historians writing a century from now? This temporal perspective also revealed the true nature of legacy. Most people think legacy is about being remembered for great achievements, monuments with your name, histories that celebrate your victories, institutions that bear your title. But I learned that real legacy is about the capabilities you develop in others, the problems you solve that stay solved, the systems you create that continue working, the principles you establish that keep guiding decisions. The Germanic wars will be forgotten, but the precedents we set for defending civilization will influence leaders for generations. The specific policies I enacted will be modified or replaced, but the philosophical approach I modeled will shape how future emperors think about their responsibilities. My personal achievements will fade from memory, but the example of using Stoic principles to guide practical leadership will inspire others to combine wisdom with action. When you adopt this temporal perspective, present setbacks become less devastating because you understand they're temporary blips in a much larger story. Current successes become less intoxicating because you know they're stepping stones rather than destinations. Daily frustrations lose their power to disturb your peace because you're focused on patterns and trends rather than individual events. This perspective also transforms your relationship with mortality. Death is no longer a tragic ending, but a natural transition, like a relay runner passing the baton to the next runner. Your life is not a complete story, but a chapter in a much longer narrative. Your worth is not determined by how long you live, but by how well you fulfill your role in the larger human drama. Start practicing temporal perspective today. Before making important decisions, ask yourself, how will this matter in 10 years? What precedent am I setting for others? What kind of world am I creating for future generations? Stop measuring your worth by temporary achievements and start building a legacy that will outlast your lifetime. Remember, you are not the author of the entire human story, but you are responsible for writing your chapter well. Make it a chapter that moves the story forward, that makes the next chapters possible, that contributes something of lasting value to the eternal human quest for wisdom, justice, and flourishing. Now I must show you how to integrate everything I have taught you into a unified system for living a comprehensive framework that transforms Stoic philosophy from abstract ideas into practical tools for creating unstoppable success in any endeavor. During my final years as emperor, as I reflected on 2 decades of applying these principles under the most challenging circumstances imaginable, I realized that the true power of Stoicism lies not in individual habits practiced in isolation, but in their integration into a coherent approach to life that compounds their effectiveness exponentially. Think of these 10 habits as instruments in an orchestra. Each one creates beautiful music individually, but when they play together in harmony, they create something transcendent that none could achieve alone. Morning reflection prepares the mind, but it becomes transformative when combined with emotional discipline and rational decision-making. Virtue, as your foundation, is powerful, but it becomes unstoppable when reinforced by service to the greater good and resilience through adversity. The framework begins each day with morning reflection, where you prepare your mind for the challenges ahead by connecting with your deepest values and clearest thinking. This daily practice sets the intention that guides all other habits throughout the day. You're not just planning your schedule or aligning your actions with your philosophy, ensuring that busy work doesn't crowd out meaningful work. Throughout the day, you apply the discipline of perception to every situation you encounter, training yourself to see opportunities where others see obstacles, to find wisdom where others find only frustration. This perceptual shift, practiced consistently, literally rewires your brain to approach challenges with curiosity rather than dread, with confidence rather than anxiety. Your decisions, both large and small, are guided by virtue as the only true good. Instead of asking what will make me happy or what will make me successful, you ask what is the right thing to do. This moral clarity eliminates most internal conflicts and external distractions, creating laser-like focus on what truly matters. The awareness of mortality memento mori infuses everything with appropriate urgency and meaning. You don't postpone important conversations, delay meaningful projects, or avoid necessary risks because you understand that tomorrow is not guaranteed. This consciousness of life's brevity paradoxically makes you more peaceful and more productive. Simultaneously, present moment mastery keeps you focused on where your power actually lies, not in the unchangeable past or the uncertain future, but in the choices available to you right now. This practice prevents energy waste on regret and anxiety while maximizing effectiveness in the only time when action is possible. Emotional discipline allows you to feel your emotions fully while choosing your responses consciously. You're not suppressing your humanity, you're expressing it more skillfully, accessing the information that emotions provide while preventing them from hijacking your judgment. Service to the greater good provides meaning that transcends personal ambition and connects you to purposes larger than yourself. This orientation creates sustainable motivation that doesn't depend on external validation or personal gain, making you virtually unstoppable in pursuit of worthy goals. Continuous learning keeps you growing and adapting, ensuring that success doesn't make you complacent and setbacks don't make you rigid. You remain curious about what you don't know and humble about what you do know, maintaining the beginner's mind that enables breakthrough insights. Resilience through adversity transforms obstacles into training equipment, setbacks into setups for comebacks, and crises into opportunities for character development. You welcome challenges as chances to practice excellence rather than evidence of life's unfairness. Rational decision-making ensures that your choices serve your highest good rather than your immediate impulses. You think systematically about consequences, gather relevant information, consider multiple options, and align decisions with your deepest values. These habits create a reinforcing cycle. Morning reflection enhances your ability to practice present moment mastery, which improves your emotional discipline, which strengthens your resilience, which enables better decision-making, which deepens your virtue, which enriches your service to others, which accelerates your learning, which sharpens your perception, which increases your appreciation for mortality's gift of urgency. The framework also includes what I call wisdom reviews, regular assessments of how well you're applying these principles and where you need to focus improvement efforts. Weekly, I would evaluate: which habits am I practicing consistently? Where am I allowing emotions to override wisdom? What opportunities for service am I missing? How can I learn from recent setbacks and successes? Monthly, I would examine larger patterns. Am I making decisions based on virtue or convenience? Is my perception becoming more disciplined or more reactive? Am I building resilience or avoiding challenges? What does my morning reflection practice need to maintain its power? Annually, I would consider the temporal perspective. What legacy am I creating through my daily choices? How am I contributing to something larger than myself? What would I change if I only had 1 year left? How are these practices shaping who I'm becoming? The beautiful result of this integrated approach is that philosophy becomes practical, wisdom becomes actionable, and character development becomes the foundation for extraordinary achievement. You're not just pursuing success, you're becoming the kind of person who naturally creates success through who you are rather than just what you do. Start implementing this framework gradually. Master one habit before adding another. Focus on integration rather than perfection. Remember that this is a lifelong practice, not a temporary program. The goal is not to become a perfect Stoic, but to become a more effective, peaceful, and meaningful human being. Your success will no longer depend on circumstances aligning perfectly or other people cooperating fully. You'll carry within yourself everything you need to handle whatever life brings and to create value, regardless of external conditions. This is the true meaning of unstoppable success. Becoming unshakable in your character, uncompromising in your principles, and unlimited in your ability to grow. As I near the end of my teachings, I must address the question I know you're asking, Marcus. These principles served you well as a Roman emperor 2,000 years ago, but how do they apply to my modern world of technology, global markets, and digital communication? The answer reveals one of humanity's most profound truths. While the surface details of human existence change dramatically across centuries, the fundamental challenges of building character, making good decisions, and creating meaningful success remain constant. The tools that helped me govern an empire can help you navigate whatever empire you're building in your own life. Consider your modern workplace, where you face political dynamics, resource competition, and pressure to deliver results while maintaining your integrity. These are the same challenges I faced in the Roman Senate, just dressed in different clothing. The colleague who takes credit for your work is the same as the senator who claimed my victories as his own. The boss who demands impossible deadlines mirrors the barbarian tribes who pressed against our borders without regard for our capacity to respond. The choice between short-term profits and long-term sustainability echoes my decisions about whether to drain the treasury for immediate military victories or invest in infrastructure for future prosperity. The morning reflection practice becomes even more powerful in your world of constant connectivity and endless distractions. Where I had to prepare for physical battles and political intrigue, you must prepare for information overload and decision fatigue. Starting each day by connecting with your deepest values and clearest thinking is not just helpful, it's essential for maintaining your sanity and effectiveness in a world designed to scatter your attention. The discipline of perception is perhaps more critical now than ever. Where I had to separate facts from rumors spread by human messengers, you must separate truth from the tsunami of information, opinions, and propaganda that floods your devices every moment. The ability to see opportunities where others see only problems, to find wisdom where others find only frustration, is your competitive advantage in a world where most people are overwhelmed by complexity and change. Virtue as your foundation becomes your anchor in a culture that celebrates moral relativism and situational ethics. When everyone around you is cutting corners, compromising principles for profit, and justifying questionable choices because everyone does it, your commitment to doing what's right, regardless of consequences, becomes a source of unshakable strength and distinctive positioning. Memento mori gains special urgency in your force-paced world, where it's easy to postpone meaningful action while pursuing busy work. The awareness that your time is limited helps you distinguish between what's urgent and what's important, between what generates immediate gratification and what creates lasting value. In a culture obsessed with youth and immortality, remembering death becomes a pathway to truly living. Present moment mastery is your antidote to the modern epidemic of anxiety and depression that comes from living mentally in the past or future while neglecting the present. Where I had to stay focused during military campaigns, despite homesickness and battle fatigue, you must stay focused on your current tasks, despite digital distractions and information overflow. Emotional discipline becomes crucial when social media amplifies every feeling and viral culture rewards extreme reactions. The ability to feel your emotions without being controlled by them, to respond thoughtfully rather than react immediately, to maintain your center while others lose theirs in online outrage and tribal thinking. These capacities make you stand out in a world of emotional volatility. Service to the greater good provides meaning and motivation in an era when traditional sources of purpose-driven community, stable employment, have weakened for many people. Finding ways to contribute to something larger than yourself, to use your talents in service of others' flourishing, creates sustainable motivation that doesn't depend on external validation or personal achievement. Continuous learning is not just helpful but mandatory in a world where skills become obsolete rapidly and new challenges emerge constantly. Where I had to adapt military tactics to changing enemy strategies, you must adapt your capabilities to changing market conditions, technological developments, and social transformations. Resilience through adversity helps you navigate economic uncertainty, career setbacks, and personal challenges in a world where change is the only constant. The ability to see obstacles as training, equipment, setbacks as information, and crises as opportunities for growth makes you antifragile in a fragile world. Rational decision-making becomes your superpower in an era of information overload and decision fatigue. The systematic approach to gathering information, considering options, analyzing consequences, and aligning choices with values cuts through complexity and confusion to help you make choices that serve your highest good. Your inner citadel, fortress of character that external circumstances cannot breach, becomes your refuge in a world of constant comparison, social pressure, and cultural turbulence. When your worth comes from your character rather than your achievements, your peace from your principles rather than your circumstances, your strength from your values rather than your validation, you become truly free. The Emperor's paradox applies, whether you're managing a team of 5 or leading a company of 5,000. The more authority you gain, the more humility you need. The more success you achieve, the more grounded you must remain. The more influence you wield, the more carefully you must use it. Legacy and temporal perspective help you navigate short-term pressures while building long-term value. In a culture obsessed with quarterly results and viral moments, thinking from the vantage point of decades and centuries helps you make choices that compound over time rather than just capture attention. These principles work because human nature doesn't change. The technologies, systems, and challenges evolve, but the fundamental task of building character, making good decisions, and creating meaningful contribution remains constant. What worked for a Roman emperor works for you because you're both. Human beings facing the eternal challenges of how to live well and lead effectively. Start applying these ancient principles to your modern challenges today. The wisdom that guided emperors can guide anyone willing to practice it consistently. My time with you draws to a close, just as my time as emperor is ending, and I must leave you with the final reflections that have brought me the greatest peace and the deepest wisdom during these 19 years of ruling the most powerful empire in human history. As I write these words, I am 58 years old, my body weakened by decades of military campaigns and the constant stress of governing 60 million souls. The Germanic wars have finally ended, the plague has run its course, and Rome is secure. Soon I will join my adoptive father, Antoninus, my teacher, Epictetus, and all the great souls who have gone before me. But the principles I have shared with you, these will outlast my physical form and continue to guide seekers of wisdom long after my name is forgotten. What I want you to understand, above all else, is this: the habits I have taught you are not mere techniques for achieving external success. They are pathways to becoming the kind of human being that success serves rather than enslaves, that recognizes achievement as an opportunity for greater service rather than personal glorification, that understands the temporary nature of all external accomplishments while building character that is eternal. The morning reflection that begins each day connects you to what is permanent in yourself: your capacity for wisdom, your commitment to virtue, your ability to choose your response to any circumstance. This practice will serve you whether you are building an empire or raising a family, leading a corporation or teaching children, creating art or protecting others. The discipline of perception transforms every obstacle into a teacher, every setback into a setup for growth, every crisis into an opportunity for demonstrating excellence. This way of seeing will make you unstoppable, not because it prevents difficulties, but because it empowers you to extract value from every difficulty that comes. Virtue, as your foundation, ensures that whatever success you achieve will be worthy of you, and whatever failures you encounter will not diminish you. When your worth comes from your character rather than your circumstances, you become truly free to take necessary risks, free to serve others genuinely, free to live according to your deepest values regardless of external pressures. The awareness of mortality, memento mori, gives appropriate urgency to everything that matters, and proper perspective to everything that doesn't. This consciousness of life's brevity will save you from wasting precious time on trivial pursuits, while motivating you to pursue what truly counts. Present moment mastery anchors you in the only time when you have actual power right now. This practice will prevent you from sacrificing today's opportunities for yesterday's regrets or tomorrow's anxieties, keeping you focused on where your influence can actually be exercised. Emotional discipline allows you to feel deeply while thinking clearly, to be fully human while acting wisely. This capacity will serve you through every challenge and celebration, ensuring that your responses are chosen rather than reactive, principled rather than impulsive. Service to the greater good connects your individual success to eternal purposes, making your life meaningful regardless of how long it lasts or how far your influence extends. This orientation will sustain you through setbacks that would crush purely self-focused motivation and fulfill you in ways that personal achievement alone never could. Continuous learning keeps you growing until your final breath ensures that success doesn't make you complacent and failure doesn't make you rigid. This commitment to growth will make your entire life a journey of discovery rather than a series of destinations to reach and leave behind. Resilience through adversity transforms you into someone who cannot be broken by circumstances, discouraged by setbacks, or deflected from your purpose by external forces. This strength will make you a source of stability for others during turbulent times and a model of what human character can achieve under pressure. Rational decision-making ensures that your choices serve your highest good rather than your immediate impulses, that your life is shaped by wisdom rather than by accident or emotion. This practice will compound over time, creating a trajectory toward flourishing that no external force can derail. These habits, integrated into your daily life and practiced with consistency, will make you unstoppable, not because they guarantee that you'll achieve every goal you set, but because they guarantee that you'll become the kind of person who can handle whatever comes while contributing something valuable to the world. I have shared with you everything I learned during 2 decades of applying Stoic philosophy to the most challenging leadership role in human history. I have tested these principles through plague and war, betrayal and loss, the corruption of absolute power, and the inevitability of death. They have never failed me. But remember, knowledge becomes wisdom only through practice. Principles become power only through application. Philosophy becomes practical only through daily discipline. What I have given you is a map, not a destination. The journey of becoming who you're capable of being, that work belongs to you. Begin today. Begin with one habit. Practice it consistently. Then add another. Focus on progress rather than perfection, on character rather than achievement, on contribution rather than acquisition. Trust that these ancient principles, proven across centuries and cultures, will create in you the kind of success that cannot be taken away, and the kind of life that cannot be lived in vain. My final gift to you is this certainty: if you commit to this path, if you practice these habits with dedication, if you build your life on virtue rather than circumstance, you will become unstoppable in the truest sense. Not because nothing will ever challenge you, but because you will develop the strength to transform every challenge into an opportunity for growth. This is my legacy to you, my final counsel, my lasting contribution to your journey toward wisdom and excellence. Use it well, share it freely, and may it serve you as faithfully as it has served me. The path is before you. The choice is yours. The time is now.